Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty fundamental, I think. We're looking at power, at procedure, and this idea of political realism.
They really are.
And we're going to try and answer a core question. What happens when reality itself is sort of declared negotiable by a leader?
Right. And what happens when the very institutions built to, restrain that power are tested right to their breaking point?
Our mission today is, well, it's pretty specific. We're going to try to strip away all the political noise, the partisan back and forth you hear everywhere.
Get past the headlines.
Exactly. We want to look at the, let's call it the raw structure underneath this whole confrontation between Jack Smith and Donald Trump. We want to understand the anatomy of an institutional test.
How close did things come to, actual failure? And maybe more importantly, what did this whole thing expose? What vulnerabilities are now out there for the future?
To do that, we have to look at this through a very specific, almost cold analytical lens that we've pulled from the source material. It's heavily based on John Mearsheimer's worldview.
Political realism, right? And it's a stark view. It assumes that major political players are guided by, first and foremost, survival.
Not ideals.
Not primarily, no. It's survival, it's the pursuit of dominance, and it's the simple logic of power. It's not about shared values or moral codes.
So under that lens, what are institutions like the courts or the Department of Justice?
They're tools. They're not sacred. They only matter as long as they, serve the goals of the people in power. They give legitimacy, sure, but they can be tossed aside if they become a constraint.
So if you take on that realist perspective, the sources we looked at say something pretty provocative right from the start.
They do.
They argue this whole conflict, this push by Donald Trump, and the very methodical, slow response from Jack Smith, who really represents those institutions. This wasn't some kind of fluke.
No.
It's described as, and this is a direct quote from the analysis, an inevitability.
Exactly. If high-stakes politics is all about power and survival, then it's inevitable that when one side loses, it's going to see the institutions that confirmed that loss as a threat.
And those institutions will, in turn, have to react to just survive themselves.
To preserve their own function, absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. This idea of survival. The sources look at Donald Trump's motivation in these really power-centric terms. So losing the 2020 election wasn't just, a political defeat.
It was seen as something much deeper.
The sources call it an existential danger.
And just think about what that means for a second.
Yeah.
The analysis suggests that the leader is more afraid of looking weak than of creating chaos.
Or looking illegitimate.
Right. So if staying in power is defined as survival itself, then anything that threatens that power has to be seen as an existential threat. It has to be eliminated.
And that's where the strategy comes from. If reality, the fact you lost an election, is a threat to your power, then what do?
You attack reality itself.
And if the institutions, the courts, the electoral process, if they stand in your way.
You don't just criticize them. You have to delegitimize them. You have to reframe things like law and procedure and accountability, not as safeguards for the system, but as the enemy, as weapons being used to destroy you.
This brings us right to Jack Smith's legal strategy, which was, I think, really sharp because he saw the argument coming.
He absolutely anticipated it.
The claim that he was just silencing political dissent. So his whole goal was to dismantle that argument from the get-go. And he made this really critical legal distinction.
It was crucial. The source material is very clear on this. He repeated it over and over. He acknowledged that Donald Trump was totally free to say he thought the election was stolen.
So the speech itself was fine.
The speech itself, yes.
Yeah.
He was free to claim victory, to protest, to even lie in the abstract. That's protected political speech.
But there was a line.
A very hard line. The claims stopped being protected speech and became criminal conduct when they turned into action. Specifically, when those knowingly false claims were used as, and this is the key phrase, instruments of fraud to target lawful government functions, that's the moment it crosses the threshold.
So it's not what you say, it's what you do with what you say. It wasn't about the speech. It was about using the speech to, obstruct the vote count?
Obstruct the count, pressure state officials, try to derail the congressional certification. The sources say that's the difference between a political debate and attempted systemic sabotage.
And this is where that realist perspective helps you see the scale of it. The sources are really clear. This wasn't some impulsive tantrum after a loss.
I don't know.
Jack Smith called it a sustained effort, built over weeks, pressure campaigns, and of course, the fake elector scheme. It was coordinated.
For anyone who maybe didn't follow all the mechanics, the fake electors were absolutely central. This was an attempt in 7 swing states to substitute the real, certified electoral votes with fake ones.
And the goal was to, what, just create confusion?
To create confusion, yes, but also to pressure Congress and the vice president on January 6th into accepting those uncertified votes, to overturn the whole thing.
The level of detail there really shows the strategic intent. And the sources point out something fascinating about Donald Trump's expectations.
Right. The core of Jack Smith's case was built around the testimony of Donald Trump's own allies.
Republican officials.
Exactly. Republican state officials, legislators, people who wanted him to win, but who, when it came down to it, refused to cross a line they saw as, fundamentally wrong.
And when they resisted, what happened?
Well, he didn't adjust his claims to fit the facts. He just rejected reality. He expected his people's loyalty to him to be stronger than their loyalty to the law, and when it wasn't, he just demanded a different reality.
And through that mere Sumerian lens, that's not delusion, it's strategy.
It's pure strategy.
So why is seeking the truth or listening to honest experts actually a bad move in a power play like this?
Because experts constrain your options. It's that simple. If survival is your only goal, then the only information you want is information that helps you do what you already want to do.
He wasn't looking for truth, he was looking for an advantage.
Exactly. He was looking for people who would validate the path he was on. If a legitimate expert told him the election was secure, that expert was useless. They were an obstacle, so they were dismissed.
It's weaponized confirmation bias.
That's a good way to put it. And this logic, this idea of hoarding influence, it goes way beyond just the election case. The sources connect this realist view to the classified documents case as well.
How so?
Well, from a pure political realist view, information is power. Control over information is leverage. So when Jack Smith details the actual Axe classified documents being stored in ballrooms and bathrooms, the obstruction, the hiding of boxes.
The sources don't see that as just being sloppy.
No, not as just administrative negligence. It's viewed as a strategic act of hoarding influence.
Hoarding influence, meaning what exactly?
Meaning, if you hold on to those materials, especially after you've been asked for them back, you're maintaining leverage. Maybe for future policy debates, maybe as protection against enemies. If you have sensitive state secrets, you have a bargaining chip. The storage location isn't as important as the intent to keep control.
Let's pivot to January 6th. The source material calls it the visible surface of a deeper campaign. This is when things turn violent.
Right.
And Jack Smith's case included some, frankly, pretty disturbing details about Donald Trump's conduct while the violence was actually happening.
It did. The evidence suggests that he knew law enforcement was being assaulted, he knew the vice president was in danger, and he deliberately chose not to act.
So if we analyze that refusal to act through the realist lens, what was the strategy? Why let the chaos continue?
The analysis is pretty brutal. It concludes that the refusal was the strategy, because chaos created pressure. Pressure created opportunity.
Disorder gives you leverage.
It gives you cover and leverage, yes. If the certification process is overwhelmed by violence, it creates a crisis. And that crisis could be exploited to argue for staying in power, outside the law.
And this gets to a key point. When actors operate on raw power, they inherently have to dispute reality. They have to claim it's all a witch hunt.
Always. Which is why Jack Smith's response had to be so meticulous. He had to create what the sources call a hard record, something that couldn't be disputed.
And he did that with a really specific legal tool, right? The toll records.
Yes, and it was brilliant in its simplicity. He didn't subpoena the content. No wiretaps, no reading text messages.
So what did he get?
Just the metadata. The toll records. It's just proof of who talked to who and when.
Why is that more powerful than the conversation itself?
Because you can lie about the content. You can misinterpret it. You can claim it was privileged. But a toll record, a hard fact that this call happened at this time, that lets you build an unassailable timeline. It proves coordination. In a world where every word is debated, that kind of documentation is a fixed point of reality.
And the reaction to even that minimal fact-gathering.
The outrage, the claims of political warfare. It just shows the sickness the sources identify.
Yeah.
When a system slides towards raw power politics, accountability starts to feel like persecution. Truth itself becomes the enemy.
And that hard record was key to showing this wasn't just a spontaneous protest. The sources talk about texts and records involving people like Steve Bannon, Boris Epstein, Rudy Giuliani.
Right. They were anticipating and shaping events in real time.
There's that one specific detail where Bannon described Donald Trump as still on fire while the Capitol was being attacked.
Which just proves that in that moment, Instability was seen as useful leverage. The priority wasn't stopping the violence, it was using the chaos.
And this all points to a deep structural tension that the sources find really worrying.
Yes, on one side you have Jack Smith representing this rigorous, slow, almost agonizing process. Grand juries, evidence gathering, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's how our institutions are supposed to work. They're slow.
And on the other side,
You have Donald Trump's actions, which all happened in just a few weeks between the election and January 6th. There's this massive speed imbalance.
so by the time the institutions even react,
The damage is already done. The institutions have speed bumps, but the political actors are driving a Formula One car.
what about the biggest structural debate, though, executive immunity? The Supreme Court expanded it, but Jack Smith's view, according to the sources, was that his core evidence was still valid.
Right.
What's the loophole that future leaders could exploit here?
The loophole is all about which hat the leader is wearing. Jack Smith argued Donald Trump was acting as a candidate, trying to overturn an election he lost.
Not as a president.
Correct. But if immunity protections get expanded, a future leader could claim they were acting in their official capacity as president, an executive duty, even if the real goal was purely political, to illegally stay in power as a candidate.
And if a leader can successfully hide candidate actions behind a presidential mask,
Then the institutional check is basically useless. It means the only thing stopping them is, individual virtue or political will, not the actual law. And that loophole is a direct result of everything we've been talking about.
and this decay isn't just theoretical. The sources point to Donald Trump seeking revenge against prosecutors, FBI agents, anyone involved in these cases. What's the strategic message there for the bureaucracy?
It's deterrence. Simple as that. It's a message to every future public servant. Enforcing the rules against a powerful person has a cost.
A personal cost.
A personal cost. Your career, your reputation. The goal is to make any future bureaucrat think twice before they ever try to hold a powerful political actor accountable again. It just hollows out the system from the inside.
You can also see that power being used to suppress information.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned Judge Cannon's order, which was reinforced by the DOJ, restricting what Jack Smith could even say about the documents case.
And Volume 2 of his report is still hidden.
The source material frames that silence very precisely. It calls it power exerting itself to control narrative.
Of course. If you can legally muzzle the investigator, you control the public's understanding of what happened. And that's essential to surviving an institutional test.
So ultimately, the analysis sees Donald Trump's near success not as a one-off failure, but as a huge instructional failure for the whole system.
Right. Failure is not a deterrent if it shows you where the weak spots are. Jack Smith's whole process effectively created a blueprint for any future leader who wants to challenge the system.
A blueprint with what? Specific lessons?
The deep dive analysis points to 4 key lessons. First, the boundaries are way wider than anyone thought. You can push much, much harder than the old rules suggested.
Okay, what's the second?
Second, institutions are slow.
Right.
Really slow. They can be bogged down with procedural challenges. Third, loyalty can, in fact, substitute for legality if you have the right people in place.
And the fourth lesson?
And this might be the most damaging one.
Yeah.
Consequences can be delayed, they can be diluted, and they can be completely reframed as persecution. You can turn the accountability system back on itself. That normalization is the ultimate win.
That's the really unsettling observation here, isn't it? That a system that relies so much on individual virtue, on people choosing to do the right thing, is just inherently fragile.
It is.
Jack Smith's restraint, his adherence to procedure, that was all necessary to protect the integrity of the institutions. But it highlights a dangerous imbalance.
A huge imbalance. One side was willing to push until something broke. The other side was committed to not breaking anything themselves.
So this deep dive really shows how close a system built on rules can get to collapsing under the weight of one person's refusal to lose.
Exactly. The sources conclude that democracy doesn't just collapse overnight. It erodes. It erodes through normalizing extreme behavior and by successfully rebranding accountability as oppression.
So after all this, what should you, the listener, take away from this? I think the most frightening question isn't whether Donald Trump crossed the line. The question, if we stick with this Mir-Shamirian analysis, is whether, after everything we've seen, the line still exists. What happens when the next leader learns from this? When they strip away the mistakes, the sloppiness, and they come at this with more discipline and a more loyal bureaucracy? That's the question you should be thinking about.